I saw on your Instagram that if you have thyroid issues, you can't or shouldn't cold plunge.
Yeah, that was quite the controversial post, wasn't it? You are manufacturing more stress for your body to deal with. And in those cases, what ultimately ends up happening is people are getting weaker. Their constitution is not actually getting stronger. At first, maybe cold plunge feels good after you do it. And then as you do it more and more, you start to notice you get more tired later in the day, the next day, more tired in general. And then you're constantly trying to raise that stress level to make yourself feel well. And instead, you need to be doing nurturing, nourishing things to your body, not creating more stress.
Hello, hello, Heal Squad. Happy to be back with you guys today because we are diving into a topic that affects millions but is so often misunderstood, and that is thyroid health. Did you know that an estimated 20 million of us here in America have some form of thyroid disease, and yet up to 60% are undiagnosed? That is why today's conversation is so important. I really want you guys to think of today's episode as a Thyroid Health 101. And helping us to do that is McCall McPherson. She is a leading expert in hypothyroidism and Hashimoto's. But beyond that, she's on a mission to change lives because, you guys, she's lived it herself. So let's simplify the science, get to some root causes, and clear up the confusion around symptoms, treatment, and healing. I know I, for one, with Hashimoto's, would love that. But first, our quote of the day. It's one of McCall's favorites from Glennon Doyle. People who are hurting don't need avoiders, protectors, or fixers. What we need are patient, loving witnesses. People to sit quietly and hold space for us. People to stand in helpful vigil to our pain. And with that, friends, let us welcome McCall. It's funny, we were talking in the open about how many of us have thyroid issues in this country, how many are undiagnosed, and yet we really don't know a lot about thyroid because I feel like when you go to your primary care and they diagnose you, they're like, just take some Synthroid or whatever. Or in my case, I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's, I think at like 25 on the Today Show live. And yeah,
Whoa.
it was part of my like diabetes week. I had my dad's endocrinologist, Dr. Ann Peters, on the show, and she was testing me live.
Oh my
And
God.
she just kind of looked at me. She was like worried to say it, but she's like, basically the way I describe it is it's part your mom's thyroid issues and part your dad's diabetes, and it's come together, and this is what you have.
Yeah.
And so that was my greatest explanation. She told me I didn't need medication. She's like, maybe later down the line you'll need it. And that was the
Wow.
end of me and Hashimoto's. And I never understood it because I didn't have time to pay attention. And so here I am now, 22 years later, with
Mhm.
you, McCall, ready to learn about
Let's do
Hashimoto's.
it. Yeah. Well, I can't believe you haven't like learned since then. There's so much to unpack. So I'm excited. Thank you. Yeah, for trusting me to speak to this. It's my whole career.
Yeah, well, it's also your personal mission because you've dealt with thyroid issues. So why don't you share with people where this all kind of started for you, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was 27, I had my worst thyroid episode, my worst thyroid flare. I was already practicing medicine, going to work every day, and eventually what was happening is I would come home from work about 3:30 in the afternoon and I would spend the next 16 hours in bed. I was trying to recover from my day while simultaneously trying to rest enough for the next day and was a non-functioning human.
Wow.
Weekends were the same. I was absolutely flat on my back, just anxious, fatigued, 15 pounds overweight. I was losing my hair and I was already on initially levothyroxine, then moved to Synthroid, but was plagued with thyroid symptoms.
And what did
And
you have exactly?
yes, so I had hypothyroidism and Hashimoto's. I didn't know, probably a lot like your story, that I had Hashimoto's at the time, but I was about to find out. And of course, like you go to your doctor and you're like, hey, listen, I'm having all these symptoms. Obviously, I was very aware of what was happening. Please help me, right? Like I'm young, I'm getting ready to have kids. I can barely function at work and outside of work, I can't.
But you were a doctor at the time. Were you specializing in this or were you in something else?
Yeah, no, I'm a PA and I was actually not in thyroid yet. I was just
Okay.
new, I'm still board certified in endocrinology and in that kind of aspect for PAs. We're board certified in multiple specialties of medicine. So, you know, I knew, but I needed someone to still help me. I wasn't an expert, of course. So
Can you
went to,
explain really
yeah,
quickly? Sorry to
yeah,
interrupt, but
no,
my very dear friend is a PA as well. That's a
yeah,
physician's assistant. Will you explain, like the way I understand it is you guys are literally one step below the doctor, but
yeah.
not officially a doctor, right?
Right. We do not go to medical school. We go to a program, I mean, a master's degree or doctorate degree that is similar, and we study all aspects of medicine. And we do rotations with med students. Actually, we're just grouped in the same group and move through that with them. But we don't ever do a residency, and we are board certified in literally every specialty of medicine, which is great because you can move around specialties, which is ultimately why I was able to land and, finally niche and into thyroid. But we don't have a residency, and then we have to re-board certify. So that's the hard part, is we have to retake our boards in nephrology, cardiology, endocrinology, neurology, all of these aspects of medicine. But our license in most states is tied to a doctor, meaning we have a medical director at Modern Thyroid Clinic and a clinical director. If we have questions, they're available always for us to call and ask and that sort of thing. But yes, we prescribe medication, we order labs, we diagnose people, and we're, I think, an essential part of the medical team, especially with the massive healthcare shortage we have these days.
Got it. Okay, just in case anybody didn't know, because I never knew either. So now go back to where you were headed
Yeah.
before.
Yeah. So I went to my doctor and I said, hey, can we do a thyroid panel? I think my medication's off. Like, I'm having all of these symptoms and let's just get it fixed, right? He ran only TSH, which I'm sure, we'll dig into later, came back low. And he was like, look, McCall, you actually don't need more medication. You need less medication. And yeah, your thyroid levels for the most part are fine, and sent me on my way. And I broke down in his office. I was like, please, if you take anything else away from me, I will not function at all. I will be a non-functioning member of society and probably end up on disability. And I went home, I researched, I dug in, and I found out, look, like there are more labs that you can run than just TSH. We can look deeper. Went to him, requested those labs. He said, no, this is all you need. TSH is the gold standard. So in my brain fog, I did a lot more research and found a physician who specialized in more complex progressive thyroid conditions, got on his wait list, saw him 3 months later, and he completely changed my life. So really, really quickly, he became a mentor to me, and I just devoured every scientific piece of literature, any resource I could find in thyroid, and started applying it to my patients. And over the years, I just ended up naturally with all of these thyroid patients because they would take my information and spread it across advocacy platforms, because I think there are millions of women also looking for answers. And from that, Modern Thyroid Clinic was built. And now I get to help people who are once just like me.
Wow. So, what was it that he did? What were the tests that he ran, and what did you guys determine was the protocol that was right?
Yeah. So, in the traditional medicine, it's a TSH only, a thyroid stimulating hormone only. That's not even a thyroid hormone, it's a hormone from your brain. And then they don't very often check the hormones that your thyroid produces, your free T4, your free T3, your reverse T3, and you need all of those things. In fact, T3, free T3, is your most important hormone. It's checked less than 10% of the time. And I even am
Oh,
not sure if I believe the stat that it is checked 10% of the time, because I don't run across people who get it checked outside of our practice. And it's your most important hormone. It's literally what drives your metabolism, your digestion, your mood, your libido, everything. And TSH is supposed to reflect in a feedback mechanism where your body says, okay, we have so many output hormones. Your free T3 look great, your free T4 look great, sends a message back to your brain and says, hey, we have plenty of hormones. You can lower her TSH. So they're supposed to be connected, but in fact, research shows they're not. I mean, TSH reflects adequately free T3 only 1% of the time. And that's not enough for us to make that the mainstay of diagnosis. So anyway, people need a full thyroid panel. We can very clearly tell what's happening with someone's biology if we check all of those hormones. Plus, as you and I were talking in the beginning, people need to be screened for Hashimoto's. People are walking around with hypothyroidism for years or decades, unknowing they have the autoimmune condition that's often associated with hypothyroidism. And for that, TPO or thyroid peroxidase antibodies really need to be checked, and also thyroglobulin antibodies need to be checked. So that's kind of like step one, right? Like if people are having thyroid symptoms and like me, their doctor's saying, hey, your labs look great, they look totally normal. The next step is always getting a full thyroid panel and really digging in and understanding what's working, what's not working in your thyroid biology. And then second to that, for me personally, I switched from Synthroid, and we can go deeper into this, but Synthroid is a completely inactive medication. It's the same as levothyroxine and tyrosine and Levoxyl. I describe it like crude oil. So we don't put crude oil in our car to make it run. We need it to make gasoline, right? But if we can't really take that crude oil and make it into gasoline, we're not going anywhere in our car. And it's the same with our
Yeah.
body, right? We're giving all these people crude oil, just assuming that they can convert it to gasoline when I think the vast majority of people can't. And so for me, the answer was shifting from an all inactive T4 crude oil based medication to a combination of crude oil and gasoline. For me at the time, that was Armour Thyroid.
I've heard of that actually. Yeah. Okay, so let's backtrack for a second and go through the different thyroid conditions, what they are and what the symptoms of them are.
I love that. So there are several. So there's the classic, what about 90% of people who struggle with thyroid symptoms have, is called hypothyroidism. Okay, so essentially that's low functioning thyroid that often confusedly shows up as an elevated TSH, meaning your body's trying to work harder to stimulate hormone production. And symptoms associated with that are fatigue and weight gain and dry skin and brain fog and hair loss. Even shedding of like the outer portion of your eyebrows is a sign. Constipation, low libido, depression. Often it manifests as elevations in cholesterol or blood sugar, like pre-diabetes. When I was 27, the doctor tried to put me on Lipitor for my high cholesterol that was actually honestly just due to my thyroid problem. And accompanying that, a large portion of the time, about 80 to 90% of hypothyroidism comes from Hashimoto's, which is that autoimmune disorder that actually attacks your thyroid gland. It mistakes it as like a foreign invader. And over time, it erodes away that hormonal secreting tissue and replaces it with almost scarry inflammatory tissue that doesn't function as well. You don't get adequate hormone secretion. And that ultimately results in those hypothyroid symptoms. Symptoms associated with Hashimoto's are the same as hypothyroidism. People often interchange them, but they are two separate entities treated in two completely different ways. But one additional symptom that you can get with Hashi is a goiter. So like a big swelling of this lower neck. It almost looks like you have a little fat pad. I used to have a massive goiter when I was in a Hashimoto's state. I've been in remission now for over a decade, but that's often a telltale sign, hey, you need to get your thyroid checked. And then the flip side, the total opposite presentation, is something called hyperthyroidism, most commonly associated with Graves' disease. So hyperthyroidism is where your body's producing too much thyroid hormone. It's making you feel anxious, sweating, palpitations, weight loss, hair loss. A lot of people, for it shows up as like exercise intolerance. Their heart rate will get up too fast, too quickly. That is largely driven by the autoimmune disease Graves that attacks your thyroid. And instead of making it lower functioning, it increases that function. And you need the same full thyroid panel to look for that. But you also need Graves antibodies, which are thyroid stimulating immunoglobulins and TRAb immunoglobulins. So both the autoimmune components can actually be influenced, which sounds like maybe you're not quite aware of yet. But And then both need to be treated, the hyper and hypo, often with medications.
Okay. So I don't know a lot of people that take the armor.
Mm.
I know because our therapist had a son who was like, or had somebody in her life that was an expert thyroid person that kept telling Kevin he needed armor. And I'm like, how come we've never heard of this in a regular medical practice? You just hear levothyroxine and Synthroid. Is there a reason why people are not making the association between the crude oil and the gasoline? And I think that that happens in a lot of health issues. I was listening to a podcast this morning with something similar where it's like apparently if you do the ketogenic diet and your body isn't doing one thing. I forget what that one thing is right now. I'm blanking, but then it actually hurts you. So it's like it's funny, like all these good things that you could be doing are actually hurting you if you're not doing something else that's necessary. And that's what that sounds like with this.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. So there's sort of a two-sided coin here, but essentially I'll tell you about my training and like the traditional conventional model. I was chatting with an endocrinologist who's our clinical director at Modern Thyroid Clinic a few weeks ago about the same thing. And I'm like, hey, let's compare and contrast education. Like, tell me about your education as far as T4 goes from an endocrinologist standpoint. And it was the same as mine. And it's sadly in medicine, it's come down to look, we are trained to only use T4 based medications, which are the ones that I listed earlier. They're all essentially the same, maybe with like different fillers and different like methods, capsule versus tablet, et cetera. But largely, they're the same medication. We're trained do not use medications with active thyroid hormone in them because you can give patients a heart attack or a stroke. Okay. And to a degree, if you use, abuse, and misuse these active thyroid hormones, there is no step where your body's activating it. So there's not a rate limiting step. You can just make people hyperthyroid. Well, that takes having no idea what you're doing, gross medical negligence. It's extraordinarily hard to overdose people on T3. And sadly, in medicine, we're trained not to use them, to be very afraid of them, and we don't know how to effectively use them. So essentially, they're not an option when you go to your primary care, your endocrinologist, when in fact studies show, hey, normal to higher levels of T3 within, a reasonable range are cardioprotective. They reduce your risk of heart disease. They reduce your risk of heart attack and stroke, of osteoporosis and osteopenia. And the flip side, higher levels of T4, which medicine has trained us to believe is perfectly safe, there's nothing wrong with it, people are totally fine, is in fact associated with higher mortality, cardiovascular disease, heart disease, osteoporosis, osteopenia. And so we're in this awkward phase of medicine where we're waiting for new research to come and actually be taken into practice, whereas it's just sitting in studies right now, not being utilized, and people don't even know that it's there. So the
Wow.
last thing I know, and the last thing is Armour is the oldest thyroid medication around. It's been around for 100 years. It was around a half of a century before levothyroxine. So our viewpoint in medicine is like, it's old, it's outdated, it's not useful, it's unstable, when in fact it's been stable for 50 years. So it's just, we're operating in this antiquated method that, and desperately, we women need an update.
But it sounds like there's a solution. It sounds like you were able to go from being laid out to feeling like a functional person, which is really nice. I remember when my baby was very, very young, I would be in that like playpen with her, just like out like a light, just cooked. Now, was it the thyroid? Was it the anemia? I have too many things. Like it's just like so hard to pinpoint, but luckily some beef liver pills got everything back to normal and I'm good. I want to ask, with thyroid issues, are they all genetic and can they pop up at any age?
Yeah, great question. So genetics can certainly play a role. Genetics can kind of prime us for autoimmune disease, right? Which is the number one contributor for hypo and hyperthyroidism. But honestly, it goes much deeper than that. So what the conventional model hasn't quite accepted yet is that Hashimoto's, Graves' disease, These are autoimmune diseases that are reversible and they're able to be influenced. We can actually put them into remission. I'm in remission. So many of our patients at Modern Thyroid are in remission. We can actually target these things with lifestyle and reverse them, preserving more of your thyroid gland. So if you reverse engineer that, if you're really stressed, you can go into a flare. If you're really, really inflamed, if you're eating poorly, you're over exercising, you're completely micronutrient depleted, it can push you into a flare. And then the other very, very common time for women to trigger Hashimoto's is postpartum. Kind of like you mentioned, they can have this transient, what's called autoimmune thyroiditis, where their body starts attacking their thyroid as their immune system picks back up postpartum. And kind of like you, they can just be exhausted, debilitated for a season, or that can actually continue on.
So you can reverse it, put it in a remission. Does that mean no more medication?
Good question. So let's think about this. Like, let's say for me, for example, I had an autoimmune disease attacking my thyroid for 10 years, right? At least that I know of. So for about 10 years, my body was attacking my thyroid, replacing that hormone secreting tissue with scarry inflammatory tissue, doesn't secrete hormones as well. And then now, let's say 10 years later, I'm in remission, right? Well, that decade of attack on my thyroid, all of that lost tissue won't regrow back, right? It's not going to magically reappear without really, really intensive, excessive potential things, that can regrow lost tissue, right? But for 99.9% of the population, that lost tissue is gone. So we have to replace that non-functional tissue with medication, even though someone goes into remission. Now, the earlier we get them into remission, the quicker, the less we need to offset that loss. Or if we intervene early enough, they can avoid medication altogether.
So how do you know you're in remission? Are your numbers in your blood perfect? And then you're good. Like, how do you know if you can get off medication?
Yeah, good question. So, remission is blood, like it's blood labs, it's objective measurable data. And so for Hashimoto's, we're looking for TPO antibodies below 34 or thyroglobulin antibodies less than 1. So a lot of people are in the hundreds, the thousands, and you
I'm
can
gonna write
intervene.
that down.
Yeah.
I'm gonna look at my recent blood work. So the TPO is to be below 340,
34. No,
34.
34. And thyroglobulin less than 1. And of
Less
course,
than
you can
one.
always send me your labs, Maria. I'm happy to give you my take
I love it. Thank
anytime.
you. I think okay, so it's nice to know that you can put this into remission. Is there a way to prevent thyroid issues?
Absolutely. So, the same way that we can influence antibodies, you can reduce your risk for developing an autoimmune disease, right? So, eating a low inflammatory diet that's really high in antioxidants. So, antioxidants combat oxidative stress, which increase risk for autoimmune diseases. Things like selenium have been shown to influence antibodies to lower them, to move people towards remission. So, 90 to 200 micrograms of selenium can help.
What's
Glutathione.
selenium in salmon?
Selenium is in the classic one that everyone loves is Brazil nuts.
Oh, nuts. Okay. I
Yeah.
was like, I can't remember. I thought it was salmon, but okay. Brazil nuts. I need to start eating some Brazil nuts, I guess.
Right. 2 or 3 can definitely help. Glutathione, most people nowadays have heard of glutathione. It's our body's most potent antioxidant. The more antioxidants we have, the less oxidative stress. And autoimmunity is tied directly to inflammation. So if we can reduce inflammation, we can reduce risk for that. Getting enough sleep, modulating your stress, the basic lifestyle things like investing in your health significantly can reduce your risk for autoimmune diseases.
I love that. Um, I saw on your Instagram that if you have thyroid issues, you can't or shouldn't cold plunge.
Mm,
Curious for you to explain that to everybody.
yeah, that was quite the controversial post, wasn't it? I mean, people, they were really dogmatic in their responses. So, this is people earlier on in their thyroid journey. So, essentially, when your thyroid is low functioning, your adrenal glands, your glands that are responsible for your stress response, are upregulating, they're more stressed, they're trying to pick up the slack. So you're walking around every day in this manufactured stress state because your body just isn't in homeostasis. It's not in a good place. So it's just pushing, pushing, pushing. And what cold plunge inherently is it creates a state called hormesis. And hormesis is we stress your body so it becomes stronger, right? And then you can build on that and continuously get stronger. The problem is when your body is chronically stressed already, when you're walking around 24 hours a day, surviving and not thriving,
Which is what
you're
got you into this mess generally, because all the fight or
totally.
flight is what got you in. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes. And then now you are manufacturing more stress for your body to deal with. And in those cases, what ultimately ends up happening is people are getting weaker. Their constitution is not actually getting stronger. They're getting weaker, and it can often manifest as at first, maybe cold plunge feels good after you do it. And then as you do it more and more, you start to notice you get more tired later in the day, the next day, more tired in general. And then you're constantly trying to raise that stress level to make yourself feel well. And instead, you need to be doing nurturing, nourishing things to your body, not creating more stress.
Got it. Yeah,
Yeah.
I can see that making sense. I know that from what I've studied, cold plunging in the cold actually helps produce more light in your body. And
Mm.
that light is what's so essential for so much healing. But you can get that by laying in the sun without having to do that. Um, so with hyperthyroidism and hypothyroidism, I know that they can also be misdiagnosed and confusing with perimenopause symptoms. And it goes back
Huh.
to what I was saying earlier. For me, I was like, what is it? There's so many things happening. But I know a lot of people are battling a couple of things at once too. I'm not the only one. How do you tell the difference?
Yeah. So, I would say the majority of the overlap with those is involved in lower levels of testosterone, which happens definitely. Like I would say, I mean, my population of data is a little skewed because it's 100% thyroid patients, but I would say 90% of women in my practice who are between the ages of 30 and above have low levels of testosterone. And those symptoms that you experience with that are fatigue, difficulty exercising, difficulty building muscle mass, lower metabolism, lower libido. And those things kind of overlap with hypothyroidism, right? And so in my opinion, it's not either or. It's most often both and. And every woman, in my opinion, should be screened and assessed for perimenopausal symptoms. And every woman, especially after the age of about 25, should be screened and assessed properly for thyroid dysfunction because the two are so intricately connected. And often women are walking around with both.
Wow.
Yeah.
What what are we doing every day that's making these conditions worse that we're not really considering?
Yeah. So inflammation, right? We, especially as Americans, most of us are walking around pretty inflamed. Standard American diet is highly processed food. That is one of the fastest ways to get inflamed is to eat food from a box or a package, right? Outside of that, there are endocrine disruptors, there are chemicals in our environment that are directly linked to Hashimoto's. They're directly linked to hypothyroidism. And so, in the same way that we're experiencing hormone dysfunction from toxins in our environment, in the air, in the plastics we drink, the fragrances we use, in the same way those are disrupting our hormones, they're disrupting our thyroid function as well. And so it takes a lot of intention to not to outrun those everyday exposures.
So what are those specifically that you're thinking of and describing?
Yeah. Yeah. So, pesticides are one. I just ran across a study 2 weeks ago on pesticides, and I can't quite remember if it was Hashimoto's or hypothyroidism. BPAs in plastics are direct endocrine disruptors. They not only influence thyroid, they influence estrogen in a huge way. They lower testosterone, they increase estrogen. And that can influence women negatively. Obviously, it can definitely influence men negatively. Um, yeah, fragrances are filled with things that directly increase estrogen, lower thyroid function, lower testosterone. And when that happens, there just is this hormone storm, that takes a while to detoxify from, to get out of your body and allow it to reset.
Speaking of detoxing, are hot saunas good for people with thyroids
You
issues?
know what? I get this question a lot. So I actually do like saunas. I think you don't want to overdo it, of course, but with saunas, you can easily go in 20 minutes, 2 to 3 times a week, and not feel depleted. Everyone needs to kind of gauge their threshold. You should never feel more depleted later that day. You should feel the same or more energized the same day or the next day. But you can build up that tolerance with saunas. They're a great way to detox. They're a great way to lower inflammation, which influences Hashimoto's, but also thyroid people. We don't sweat. Like, it's strange. We have something called anhydrosis, which keeps us from like detoxifying, right? So creating that mechanism of sweating is powerful.
That's so wild because I've
Yeah.
always said, I'm like, I'm not a sweater.
Yeah. I'm so
I mean,
curious what your thyroid is.
I know, I'm gonna look it up. But I was in my sauna yesterday and it was like insane. I was sweating from second one on a level that I've never sweat, and I was like, oh my God. And so my naturopath was like, yeah, you've got a lot of deuterium that's coming out from all the travel and stuff. And I was like, wow, like I really needed this, but I couldn't stay in there. Normally I do like a 40-minute session. I could only do 20 minutes. It was too much. But yeah, okay, that's really cool to know. We are going to pause here for now, but don't go far because McCall will be back tomorrow and we're going to be diving into the conventional treatments for thyroid issues and if they work. We're going to talk thyroid cancer. I'm going to give my thyroid numbers to McCall and see what she says. Tune in tomorrow to find out more. In the meantime, friends, be nice people, make good choices, and be present. Hey, Heal Squad. We have been on quite the journey together, and we're hearing from so many of you just how much this show is helping you heal and get better, and it makes us feel so good. We love, love, love it, and we just ask that you don't keep it to yourself. Spread the message and share the show or your favorite episode with your friends. And if you want to help us even more, you can leave us a 5-star rating and a comment on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and follow us on Instagram at Heal Squad. You can also DM us anytime because we love connecting with you. And finally, you can also join us on Patreon for our monthly live heal events with world-class healers and ad-free episodes exclusive only to Patreon and our Super Heal Squad for as little as $10 a month. So go to patreon.com/Heal Squad to join. Getting better isn't easy, friends, but as I say all the time, it's a whole lot easier if we can do it together. We love you all so much, and we love doing this thing called life with you.
This podcast and all related content published or distributed by or on behalf of Maria Menounos or MariaMenounos.com is for informational purposes only and may include information that is general in nature and that is not specific to you. Any information or opinions expressed or contained herein are not intended to serve as or replace medical advice, nor to diagnose, prescribe, or treat any disease, condition, illness, or injury, and you should consult the healthcare professional of your choice regarding all matters concerning your health, including before beginning any exercise, weight loss, or healthcare program. If you have or suspect you may have a healthcare emergency, please contact a qualified healthcare professional for treatment. Any information or opinions provided by a guest expert or host featured within website or on company's podcast are their own, not those of Maria Menounos or the company. Accordingly, Maria Menounos and the company cannot be responsible for any results or consequences or actions you may take based on information or opinions.